Hello, I'm titling this, video, The Ramblings of an Apologetic Calvinist. Essentially, as all my friends can testify, I am definitely no expert in the law of God. I only joined the debate between Calvinism and Arminianism about a year ago. Though I've heard of the 5 points of Calvinism and the Arminian Objections years before, I've never really dwelt on them or thought about them for myself. And I suppose perhaps some of you can relate that as you dive into a massive, debate or rivalry between different perspectives, there are lots of arguments, lots of sources that you can view and notes to jot down and all of these things. So after doing a little bit of research myself, I decided to collate the things that I believe and I think are useful into a video, because I think that's a nice, neat way to summarize my findings. So for whoever's benefit this is, whether it's simply only mine or whether anyone else comes across this, then I hope that this provides some clarity on the issue and why I believe Calvinism is the right way to go. So I thought we'd just start with the words predestined in the Bible. Now, predestined, that word comes up actually twice in the Bible, and throughout this video I'm going to try and actually display the sections that the verses on the screen so that you can see where they come up. So the first one is obviously in Romans chapter 8, that's verse 30, and this way you can keep me on track. So in verse 30, here we go. And those he predestined, he also called. And those he called, he also justified. Those he justified, he also glorified. And it says here that God foreknew the ones that he also predestined to conform to the image of his Son. Let's have a look at the second one, which is actually in Ephesians chapter 1, verse 5. So having a look here. For he chose us in him before the creation of the world to be holy and blameless in his sight. In love, he predestined us for adoption to sonship through Jesus Christ in accordance with his pleasure and will. Okay, so I feel like these verses are so clear as an argument for predestination, though I can understand why it could be argued by those who are persistent that when he is choosing us, the us refers to all the people in the world who may end up getting saved, and not just the elect. So I suppose it could be argued that way. And just for the sake of it, throwing in one more verse here from 1 Peter. To God's elect, and I'm raising this just for this word, to God's elect, the exiles scattered through the provinces of all of these places where back then we thought the early Christians were meant to be. So essentially my understanding is that this is for all Christians, and God calls them his elect, who have been chosen according to the foreknowledge of God the Father. And I feel like that's also a very clear verse that supports predestination. But honestly, even if we were to depart from these verses, which I think are possibly the strongest even arguments that I've got right now, even if we were to depart from those, I'd like to raise a few totally other points, and it's going to be a bit of a journey, and I want to take you through my thinking process about all of this. Alright, so if we were to leave these verses alone, I think that both perspectives, Calvinism and Arminianism, and I suppose any other perspective that aligns with the core philosophies of Christianity, would most likely agree about the sovereignty of God. Okay, so I'm going to use this as a segue into how God's sovereignty balances with our human free will. So let's just start with that first phrase, God's sovereignty. What does it mean? It means that God is in control. God is in control and has authority to do all kinds of things. He has authority over sickness. He can demand spirits to leave a person, or he can tell a person to get up and pick up his mat and leave. He can do that. And God is able to do all kinds of things. And he is sovereign. He decides when nations rise and fall, like in Exodus chapter 34. He decides what happens to those nations. In verse 10 and 11, see, then the Lord said, I am making a covenant with you. Okay, before all your people I will do wonders never before done in any nation in all the world. Obey what I command you today, and I will drive out before you the Amorites, Canaanites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. Like, sucks to be them. They're going to be driven out, and they can't do anything about it, because the one who is against them is the Lord God Almighty, who is sovereign above all things. They can't do anything. The Lord is sovereign. He decides the outcomes of wars. I feel like I remember a phase whenever they carried the Lord's Ark with them into battle, they were victorious, until this one time that they lost the Ark, and obviously they were completely devastated in the battle, right? And he's sovereign. And if I bring a New Testament example into this, so for example in Romans chapter 9, Romans is such a great passage on this. So in Romans chapter 9, you can see that in verse 17, for scriptures says to Pharaoh, I raised you up for this very purpose, that I might display my power in you, and that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth. Okay, so you can see that was also quoting Exodus. Alright, so God, through Moses, said to Pharaoh that God actually raised Pharaoh up. It wasn't him. And God raised him up to be the most powerful human being on earth, just so God could now utterly destroy him and show that God was actually in control. And one would say that he orchestrated Pharaoh's rise to power. So God was in control at that time. And there are so many examples where God was the one who orchestrated it. Recall these phrases that I'm not going to show you because there are so many of them, where God says to Abram, I will make you into a nation. I will give you descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky. I will do this. I will do, help you do that. Or he tells, for example, Joshua, walk around the walls of Jericho 7 times and this will happen. He doesn't just have a foreknowledge of these things. He didn't just know that Pharaoh was going to be utterly destroyed. He actively caused it. So perhaps that's a nicer, milder version of saying that not only did he have foreknowledge, he predestined Pharaoh to be in that position where he would be utterly destroyed. Okay, so God has the power to raise up nations and bring them down. And I want to go one step further. What about people themselves? What about people themselves? You see, in Exodus, whenever Moses asked Pharaoh, whether it was before or after a plague that happened, Pharaoh always begged Moses to ask God to stop the plague, but whenever Moses asked again, he would say, or it would read that Pharaoh hardened his heart, or in fact, it would read that God hardened Pharaoh's heart. So God hardened Pharaoh's heart. And you can see here, therefore God has mercy on whom he wants to have mercy, and he hardens whom he wants to harden. And I feel like this is very clear in saying that God actually actively determine what our actions would be. Right, so he has a part to play. Some commentaries say that while it does say that God hardened Pharaoh's heart, it was a bit more like a Job situation where he actually just allowed Satan to tempt Job or to cause suffering for Job. But essentially God was more of a passive, more of a secondary cause to these events. But regardless, the hardening of Pharaoh's heart was still decided by God there. Alright, let's have a look at some other instances where God has an active part in how we act and behave. Let's have a look at 1 Samuel 16. Now, I'm choosing a couple of these ones that come to my mind, though I haven't done extensive research. Even just these ones I feel are so clear. So, here we go. In 1 Samuel Chapter 16, this is about King Saul. Now, the Spirit of the Lord had departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord tormented him. Now, that's so interesting. See, the point I'm trying to make is that, see, God is so active in our lives that it even seems to imply that that His Spirit comes into us and affects how we go. Now, some commentaries believe that an evil spirit from the Lord, well, there are various interpretations to what that means. Can the Lord cause us to sin? Can the Lord tempt us? Doesn't it say that the Lord doesn't tempt us? Well, you can do your own research on that, but in my interpretation right now, and though I'm very aware that through perhaps more advanced research of my own, I might change my answer, my interpretation is that as the Lord Spirit departed from Saul, he is left to his own devices. And I think I remember a quote saying that the worst thing that our Lord God could ever do to us would be to leave us alone, because that would be our destruction, that would be our doom. And it could be just a metaphorical way of just saying that that while the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, an evil spirit, or his own spirit, was tormenting him. I don't know. That would be something there. But if we were to compare to another passage in Samuel, here we go. Verse 12. Now Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with David, but had departed from Saul. So he sent David away from him and gave him command over 1,000 men. And in everything that he did, he had great success because the Lord was with him. And I think that's so interesting, because it seems like that whenever the Lord was with David, he was successful. And whenever the Lord was left somebody, then they were perhaps in fear, or they were unsuccessful. I don't know. So it gives the impression that the Lord actually has a very active part in our lives and decides what happens with us. Right? What about? And if we were to leave these stories from the Old Testament, well, let's think about some real life examples. I remember as a kid, that there was a story that really impacted me a lot, though it was in Mandarin. So I'm having a hard time translating it, but it was about a baker who owned a shop. No, I think he was actually just a worker, a servant in the shop, but he wasn't the boss. So he was a servant in the shop, and whenever something bad to him, he would say 感谢主, which meant thank you, Lord. And it was really strange about why he did that. And whenever something bad to him, he was always happy, and he thanked the Lord for it. And that was a bit of an inspiration to me. Anyway, the manager knew about his servant, and he saw that he was always happy in whatever circumstance, and he actually got really angry with him, and he hated that servant. And that was really strange. So the servant, one day he was chopping up the bread in the morning in the bakery, and he accidentally chopped off one of his fingers. And what's really interesting was that he still said, thank you, Lord. And I can't remember if he said anything else, but he said, thank you, Lord. And his boss was still very, weirded out by him. And now a few weeks later, there was an enlistment for a war, and when the officers came, they were going to take away people from their homes and from their work, from their jobs. And what happened was that they saw the servant who had a missing finger and was like, no, he's not suitable for war. So they left him alone and instead took the boss away. And so you can see that. And in stories like that, it very much seems like, well, if I was a servant, perhaps the same as you guys, or if anyone can relate, I'd probably be thinking, wow, Lord, you orchestrated this. How far ahead did you plan? Did this bad thing actually give rise to an occasion for a good thing for me? Did you grant me mercy on that behalf? Now, in my very limited memory and brain power, I could only think of that one on the top of my head, but I'm sure that if I was to think about more, there are some personal ones for me that I've gone through where events seemed bad, or they indirectly led to a very miraculous event, or an event of God's grace. And I'm sure that perhaps you might be able to think of some yourself. You see, these events, we might react in this way where we feel like God has been orchestrating that event. And I wonder, I think that God does play a very important part in our personal lives. So if we were to think about all of these stories, we might begin to ask ourselves, well, how far does God get involved? How deeply can God be involved in our life, affecting our decisions and actions before it is not our own free will anymore? I think this is actually perhaps the biggest struggle to convince people to the Calvinist perspective, and I fully understand it. How far can God direct us, control us, orchestrate our lives before it's not free will? Honestly, as I created my research, conducted my research, I believe that they're not actually mutually exclusive. God's sovereignty and our own free will, it's not mutually exclusive. I think if we were to talk about it, predestination, the idea that God can choose who goes to heaven and hell and decide it before the beginning of time, I think it gives the illusion that we didn't decide for ourselves. It gives an illusion, but it's only that, it's an illusion. Let me explain with some more examples, let's have a look. Romans 9. Once again, what a great passage. So if we were to look at Romans 9 and where we talk about Jacob and Esau, have a look. Yet, before the twins were born or had done anything good or bad, in order that God's purpose in election might stand, not by works but by him who calls, she was told, the older will serve the younger. Just as it was written, Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. What the heck? He just decided that, the Lord. And we can't complain because it says here, like in Deuteronomy, when God says to Moses, I will have mercy on whom I have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I have compassion. Who are we to complain? The Lord has the right to decide how it goes. The older will serve the younger. That's just how it goes. And he decided without looking at the merits of either of the two kids. And when you remember the story, when Jacob was making the stew and Esau wanted some of that stew because he was hungry, he sold the birthright to Jacob, not because he was like a robot being controlled by somebody. He sold it because he was willing to do it, and Jacob got the birthright. They made their decisions themselves, even though the Lord decided before that the older will serve the younger. They played an active part as well. So I don't think they're mutually exclusive. All right. What about David? What about David? David was a willing servant to God and king for Israel. But when God sent Samuel to find David or choose a king, remember what he said. He didn't choose the strongest guy looking at their merit, or he didn't, there was no condition to it. Whenever Samuel was looking at one of the sons of Jesse, you might recall that it was written, "Nor have I chosen this one," or "Nor have I chosen that one. I have not chosen this one." And then Samuel was forced to say, "Do you have another son? Where is he? Bring him here." And it turned out to be the smallest one. You see, God chooses simply because he wants to. And perhaps he chose David because he was the smallest, so that the world could see that as long as the Lord was with David, he could overcome giants. The Lord has his own plan, and he acts on it, but it doesn't mean that we're merely puppets. They're not mutually exclusive. What about the change from Saul to Paul? I could go on with so many examples. Saul to Paul. Was he an unwilling figure? Have you seen how far Apostle Paul was willing to go for the cause of Jesus, of God, for the kingdom? But before then, Saul was a very unlikely person to have joined the way, as they called it back then. And it's crazy. It's only the work of God. Paul wasn't unwilling. Was he kicking and fighting and resisting God the whole way through when Jesus revealed to him and said, "Saul, why do you kick against the goad?" I can't remember exactly. I think God does choose us. So I believe there is sufficient evidence for predestination. And you might think it's not a new thing. Honestly, it's not a new thing. Didn't he choose Israel to be his chosen nation, his chosen people? God chose Israel. Isn't that right? And you can see here we go. It is not as though God's word had failed, for not all who are descended from Israel are Israel, nor because they are his descendants are they all Abraham's children. It isn't through physical descent here, right? Not physical descent, but children of the promise who are regarded as Abraham's offspring. That's us. Right? God chose a people. Why did he choose Israel and not the Amalekites or the Hittites? Right? Why? There is a precedent. He has chosen before. So my question, as I want to close my very first point here, is it so hard to accept that we were chosen, that predestination exists? Is it that hard, given all this evidence, to accept that we were chosen? I personally don't see any other way. For example, my objection, if we weren't chosen, that if we did have a part to play in deciding whether or not we could reject or accept God's call, would be that it raises the possibility that there could be a reality where no one ends up going to heaven. No one apart from the ones that we know already are there, like Elijah. There is a possibility that no one goes if we could accept or reject. Isn't that right? And I think that it's rather unbelievable to think that God would be so not in control. Or God would be so passive rather than active. So passive in his efforts to save people. Whereas all the stories that we've heard today, he's been so active. In our own lives, he's so active. He made Abraham into a nation. He was so active about that. He made promises, he fulfilled them, he did all of these things. He wasn't a passive God. He is not a passive God. So why would he be so passive, just letting us decide? And even if there was a shred of him influencing our decision, even say like by 1%, by 2%. If it was 90% us, 10% him, honestly, that's pretty much predestination. Who can resist the will of God? So I suppose that concludes the first part of the evidence that I have to support Calvinism. There are some objections that other people have raised against Calvinism. For example, let's have a look at this one. Maybe just because I'm chosen or I'm elected, using the term in Scripture, doesn't mean that I'm guaranteed to go to heaven. Doesn't mean I'm predestined to go to heaven. Maybe just because I'm elected doesn't mean I'm predestined. Like Judas. Didn't Jesus choose him as one of the 12? He was an apostle, but he betrayed Jesus in the end. Now, so that is a very valid objection people will think about. But the interesting thing is that Judas's betrayal was actually prophesied all the way back in Zechariah in the Old Testament. There's a pretty clear reference to how Jesus was going to be betrayed, and for 30 silver coins. And not only so, let's have a look at what Jesus himself says in John chapter 17 verse 12. So John chapter 17 verse 12, you see, he says, so in his prayer, Holy Father, protect them by the power of your name, the name you gave me, so that they may be one as we are. While I was with them, I protected them and kept them safe by that name you gave me. None has been lost except the one doomed to destruction, wink wink Judas, so that scripture would be fulfilled, so that the book of Zechariah would be fulfilled. Judas was the exception. There's not another like him. Okay, so in fact my belief of this suggestion is that we are not going to lose our salvation unless, of course, we were prophesied that we would betray Jesus or something, that we were prophesied that would happen. Not only so, Judas, it may not even be, even if we were to look at another scripture in John chapter 13, you can see that his decision was, in fact, there was a, what's the word? Celestial influence. Here we go. Jesus answered, as he was going to reveal who was going to betray him, "It is the one to whom I will give this piece of bread when I dipped it in the dish." And then, after dipping it, he gave it to Judas. As soon as Judas took the bread, Satan entered into him. So you can see that his decision was influenced by higher powers. It was orchestrated. Judas was the exception. Whereas for us, it's not going to be so. And I'm going to show you why. It's not going to be that people aren't going to follow in Judas's footsteps, that being elected, we're still going to live like the devil. We're still going to, just go wild and totally crazy. Why not? So when I do my Bible readings, I often like to consult this commentary, and I haven't used them much in my video today, but I'm going to use it at least once, surely, at least once. You see, 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, "For our gospel did not come to you in word only, but also in power and in the Holy Spirit and in much assurance, as you know what kind of men we were among you for your sake." Okay, so do you believe that the gospel is just words? Or do you believe that it actually has power in it? If it is just words, well, that's a bit depressing. I believe that the gospel has power in it. And you see here, it's not just power for miracles. It's not just power for wonderful signs from God. I think the gospel doesn't just have power to get us into heaven. It has the power to change minds, hearts, and lives. And if we were truly touched by the gospel, we would be changed people, so much so that we would not live like the devil anymore, not follow in Judas's footsteps, that we wouldn't do that. And I would say that I would argue that, yes, there is very much a chance that we will stray. Like the prodigal son, there is very much where we could be deceived by others temporarily, by false prophets. We could stray in the active sin that we have in our lives. We can stray, that's totally true. But given that the gospel is in us and that we have the power, that our minds and hearts and lives have been transformed by the gospel, that would not be our pattern, or we will find our way back. We're not going to lose our salvation. Why do I believe that? Let's have a look at some of the promises. These are really exciting parts. Let's have a look at some of the promises that are given to us. There are a couple in John, but honestly, we've done John a few times now. So let's have a look at Philippians Chapter 1. Philippians Chapter 1:6. Being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Jesus Christ. Right? That our sanctification will occur through our entire life. He will carry it onto completion. What about in 2 Corinthians Chapter 1? Let's have a look at 2 Corinthians Chapter 1, looking at verse 22 here. So God who makes both us and you stand firm in Christ. See, the Lord makes us stand firm in Christ. We're not the ones who chose to do that. The Lord helps us do that. He protects us, right? He anointed us and set his seal of ownership on us. Put his spirit in our hearts as a deposit, guaranteeing what is to come. How much more clear can you be? We have the Spirit. We are guaranteed for what is to come. That's a promise. All right, let's have a look at another one. Where are we? Acts chapter 13, verse 48. Okay, so down here. When the Gentiles heard this, they were glad and honored and believed the word of the Lord, and all who were appointed for eternal life believed. Perhaps I should have used this at the beginning of this video. This is more about, I suppose, the word predestination rather than God making the promise to keep us in His care. All right, let's have a look at the verses in John. These ones are pretty clear as well. So in John chapter 6, we've got verse 37. All those the Father gives me will come to me, and whoever comes to me I will never drive away. So the Lord will never drive us away. Perhaps it could be argued that even though the Lord won't drive us away, what if we just leave of our own accord? What if we leave of our own accord? Well, let's have a look at the next verse here in 44 as well. See, no one can come to me unless the Father who sent them draws them. We can't even approach God. Choose Him ourselves. So this is perhaps another argument for the fact that we are predestined, that we are the elect. No one can come to God unless we are drawn. I would argue what is easy for me to believe, and perhaps I can do more research on this. What is easy for me to believe is that, see, if Jesus can't drive us away, well, we sure as anything can't. All right. When losing my notes here a little bit, but I do believe that is the case. We are the sheep who know the voice of our shepherd. We know Jesus. We're not going to leave of our own accord. So that is my response to some people's objection that while we may be elected to a position, to a power, we may be elected to a title, we're not actually guaranteed to go to heaven. That's my response to answer that issue, and I believe that we are guaranteed to go to heaven, which aligns with in the 5 points of Calvinism, the last one the perseverance of the saints. Let's have a look at another objection to a Calvinistic point of view. Why then do we preach to others? If people are going to heaven will go to heaven, people who are doomed will not go to heaven, why preach? Why live well? Doesn't that sort of take the responsibility away? Doesn't it take it away? I'm so moved by this verse that our youth pastor, young adults pastor, Pastor Will Crank once shared in a devotion when Esther sent a response to Mordecai regarding saving or pleading for the Jews. Mordecai says, "Do not think that just because you are in the king's house alone, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish." That's so powerful. I think that I believe that God's will be done, regardless if we do something or not, regardless if we preach or not, regardless if we live well or not. But this highlights the idea that God doesn't just want his story to be told by him alone. He is inviting us to be a part of God's story for God's glory. He is inviting us. How amazing is that? What privilege we get as the children of God to be a part of his amazing plan. He is asking us, like he is asking Esther, to be a part of it, to be used for his amazing purpose. But even if we choose not to, his will still be done. The Jews will still be saved and delivered. And I think that's amazing. So that's my first point. The second point, if I was to raise up Lazarus, Jesus knew that he was going to die. He in the Gospels, he made his way to where Lazarus lived even before he died. And in fact, when Lazarus did die, Jesus wept for him. He still cried. So the point is, even though what's going to happen is bound to happen, that Jesus knew Lazarus was going to die, it still affects us personally. That the events that will unfold are still going to affect us personally. Right? So it's still part of our story. What about another chapter? John 10. If you know what this one is. Another one from the Gospel of John. I apologize. John chapter 9. So his disciples asked Jesus when they saw a blind man who was blind from birth, "Rabbi, who sinned? Is it this man or his parents that he was born blind?" Jesus said, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him." So you can see that sometimes, why do we preach? Why do we live well? Well, it's because that if we do preach, if we do live well, we might come across the opportunities to still bring glory to God in front of others. We can still do that. We, like Esther, can still be a tool that is used to display the works of God. And why else would we still preach and live well? Well, let's have a look at in Philippians Chapter 1. It says that we should live a life worthy of the gospel. That we want to live a life worthy of the gospel to which we've been called. We already have the prize. It should be our motivation to live up to it, right? And even if I was to depart from the Bible verses once again, let's just think about this concept. I believe that if someone was to save your life by trading their life for yours, to sacrifice their life for yours, like another human person, but he was a good fella, everyone liked him, he was nice, decent, upright person, and he would trade his life to save you, or say push you out of the way of a train that you didn't see, but in doing so would cause him to die. If someone was to sacrifice their life for yours, then it may be that you would feel the motivation, you would have the gratitude if you were to say a normal person of of somewhat decent conscience, even a little bit. I'm sure, just as I'm sure I would feel, that I would be motivated and owe it to him to live up to what I have been received, this free gift of life. In fact, especially if I was a despicable sinner, as we all are before we've been saved, a despicable sinner, honestly, we would feel like very much so that we didn't deserve our free gift of life, that we would want. In fact, we may even be more motivated to live a moral and upright life after we've been saved than if we weren't saved and we were just living well to get into life, to get into heaven like a Pharisee. Then if we felt like we deserved it. That's why. So there is very much still a point why we preach, why we live well, because we are now motivated to do so even more than we might have been previous to us being saved. I sure hope that was as groundbreaking to you as it was to me when I thought about that concept. There is no way for us to do any good. In Isaiah 64, it says that even our righteous acts are like filthy rags. There's no way we can get into heaven by ourselves. I am certain of it. We were chosen. Well, honestly, in my own ignorance and the very beginning stage of joining this debate, I suppose it's very foolish of me to be so certain. It could honestly be, perhaps, who knows about what God's mysterious plan for me is. It could honestly be that in a couple of years I might change sides. Regardless, even after all my points, I want to acknowledge sincerely that this is not a conversation, as you would know, that affects our salvation, arguing, debating about predestination between the perspectives of Calvinism and Arminianism, and perhaps even a third or other perspectives. It's not necessary for salvation. But I think I don't know, if I was God, maybe he planned this for us without leaving us a clear answer, so that we would be inspired by the rivalry to pursue knowledge and to be scholars. If we knew all the answers, I'm sure we'd be too lazy to do all this. So I think there are some less answers that we just don't know. But given the evidence that I've come across, I'm heavily inclined to believe the Calvinist perspective. Thank you for joining me today.